For those of us who have been following the unrest in Ukraine, the last couple of days have been quite hectic. Kiev is in turmoil, Lviv has proclaimed its desire for independence, ethnic Russian separatism is rising in the Crimea, and the Euromaiden demonstrations have so far claimed the lives of more than 100 people. The country is broken, falling apart and fragmenting into smaller entities. Some analysts are calling Ukraine the next Yugoslavia. But what exactly is so special about this country? Why are the Europeans even in Ukraine? And what are Russia's interests in Kiev? My name is Shirvan and this is a Caspian report for Maidan TV. Visit the website for more information and updates. So what started out as a Russian loan disagreement a few months ago has since then turned into a bloody crackdown. And even though the early demonstrations were peaceful, the situation escalated when the Ukrainian president Viktor Yanukovych refused to sign the agreement with the European Union, which would integrate the country's economy with the Europeans. This ignited much larger demonstrations in the capital Kiev, and protesters are calling for the president to step down and to hold new elections. The overall mood is that the country should have a European orientation rather than a Russian one. As we very well know, nothing is ever that simple, so let's look at it from a geopolitical perspective. For about 2 decades now, Ukraine has been an independent state. This is in fact the longest period of Ukrainian independence in centuries. Generally speaking, it is a resource-rich country with many sources of mineral and agricultural products. But even more importantly, it's a strategically located country. And to understand the geopolitical value of Ukraine, we have to take a look at the history. In fact, one can learn to understand geopolitics just by reading Ukrainian history. After all, this is a country which at times was part of the Ottoman, Polish, Austrian and Russian empires. So Ukraine has been on the border of empires. In fact, the name itself is derived from Ukraina, which means borderland. And as most frontier regions, it carries a value, especially for the Russian Federation. Now, economically speaking, most of Russia's pipelines run through Ukraine, and given the fact that Russia's economy is largely driven by its natural gas exports, it is vital for Moscow to control those routes so it can better influence the price rates. Furthermore, the Ukrainian oligarchy has close business links to the Russian oligarchy. European regulations would undermine the position of not only Ukraine's elite, but also Russia's elite. Ideologically speaking, Ukraine sits at the very core of the Russian identity. It was the medieval state of Kievan Rus which united the lands of modern Russia, Belarus and Ukraine, and thus set the precedent of the Russian identity. For Russians, losing Ukraine would be ideologically equal to the German loss of Eastern Prussia. But more important than resources, pipelines, and ideology is security. Most of Russia's topography is quite flat and offers little geographic protection against invaders. In military terms, this kind of terrain is indefensible and will exchange hands often. This is why invading armies like the Mongols, the French and Germans were quick to conquer vast portions of lands. The Russians are well aware that the lack of geographical barriers makes their country very vulnerable to any kind of military transgression. And so what you have to understand here is that the Russian national security strategy relies on the Ukrainian and Belarusian buffer zones. The latter borders the Carpathian Mountains, which are traversable but will slow down any military advancement. It is, however, the eastern part of Ukraine that is the most critical. From here, it is only about 700 kilometers to the border of Kazakhstan. If Ukraine would fall under the influence of some other power, and that foreign power would block the flat, elevated Ukrainian-Kazakh gap, Russia in turn would lose its agricultural heartland, lose control over its lands in the northern Caucasus, Russia would be further cut off from the Caspian Sea and its Black Sea commercial ports of Odessa and Novorossiysk, and the military port of Sevastopol. From then on, the Russian Federation would cease to exist. This is why Ukraine is fundamental to Russia's security. This vulnerability was exploited during World War I, when in 1917 the Germans demanded that the new Bolshevik leadership relinquish its control over Ukraine. The Germans understood that with Ukraine under their control, they could pressure Russia indefinitely. Germany failed, but it didn't stop them from trying again in the Second World War. This time the Soviets halted the Germans at the Battle of Stalingrad. This kind of militaristic thinking might sound strange for 2014, but the Russians have been caught off guard many times throughout their history. For example, in 1932, Germany was broken. By 1941, they had conquered the European continent and were deep in Russian territories. If there's one lesson that the Russians have learned from their long and bloody history, it is to plan ahead and expect the unthinkable. Never plan on the thoughts of others, but on their capabilities. This may sound paranoid, but it's just the way things are done in the Russian geopolitics. In short, Ukraine is strategically valuable for any foreign power that wants to undermine the Russian Federation. So what is the European Union doing there? Well, first off, the EU does not have a general foreign policy. The European invitation to Ukraine and the Eastern Partnership that also includes Belarus, Moldova, Georgia, Armenia and Azerbaijan was initiated by Poland, a historical rival of Russia. The Polish grand strategy is to use its EU privileges and resources to encircle Russia and form a buffer zone for Warsaw against Moscow. Germany, having many mutual energy investments planned with the Russians, is playing both sides of the coin. Publicly, Germany supports the demonstrators, but the leadership of the country has also openly stated that the Polish-led initiation was a mistake. My point is that the European Union has no single strategy regarding Kiev. There are, however, certain members within the Union that do have strategic interests in Ukraine. And while we are on the subject of the European Union, it is worthy to note that the Eastern Partnership is merely an invitation, not a guarantee for membership. The last thing Germany, France and other core EU members need is another weak country dragging them down, especially amidst the ongoing financial crisis. Russia understands this reality and therefore has been relatively calm in its reaction to the demonstrations in Kiev. Putin understands that the European Union is unwilling to take in Ukraine for now, and feels there is no need to play the offensive card here. And as for the American involvement, while the United States was a strong supporter of the Orange Revolution back in 2004, this was a turning point for US-Russian relations, and since then Putin has continuously worked to reverse the process by using economic pressure and intelligent networks. And for the most part, Russia has been successful, mostly because of Washington's involvement in the numerous Middle Eastern conflicts, and this is also why the US has minimal involvement in Ukraine. The last thing Washington needs is to aggravate the Russians, who in turn could complicate and even derail American Middle Eastern issues like in Iran and in Syria. Remember, there are no good guys or bad guys here. There is no evil empire. Every country is acting on behalf of its interests. The events in Ukraine are awakening the old regional web of alliances, but I think the situation is rather unpredictable. President Yanukovych has agreed to a number of compromises, including the formation of a transitional government and holding early elections. I personally have my doubts whether this would be a game changer or not, because Russia has many options and leverages when it comes down to Ukraine, and any new Ukrainian president would face the same restrictions that Yanukovych did. I think that Ukraine is a classic case of an independent country whose geopolitical environment has placed restrictions on its sovereignty. This was a Caspian Report by me, Shirvan, doing a report for Maidan TV. Be sure to visit the provided website and Facebook pages for more information on Caspian Report and Maidan TV. And as always, thanks for watching, and Sağ ol.